I remember how the laughter had sounded like the clink of ice against glass, bright and careless, the kind of sound that polishes a room and leaves no trace of what's been broken beneath the shine. She said it like a dare tossed across the table, like a bright stone thrown into shallow water to watch the ripples spool outward, and everyone watched me as if I were the current that might carry that stone away. So I smiled. The thin, private smile a man keeps when he decides to let something small pass. And I let the joke hang between us like a kite on a still day. Her friends leaned closer to each other and told stories. She told hers louder than the others, a spotlight persona she wore when she wanted the room to orbit her. And for a while I listened to the orbit with that patient, steady gravity I had been cultivating for months. The gravity that had pulled, me into believing I could weather the little storm she made for sport. I had known her for 3 years, or at least the version of her that showed up when it suited her, bright, witty, fiercely competitive, hungry for applause. I loved the edges of that woman, how she bled laughter like a famous song and how she could turn a mild inconvenience into an epic anecdote. But there were edges I'd never been allowed to touch. She had a tendency to test men the way a gardener tests soil by prodding at the roots to see if it holds, and if you balked at the poke, you were dismissed as weak. She told me once, half drunk and perfectly sincere, that she liked men who could take a laugh and give one back, and I promised myself that I would be both patient and clever, because patience seemed noble and cleverness seemed safer than pride. The evening after the joke, she stayed out with friends. I had an extra shift at the diner and promised to close early and meet her home. I don't know whether I planned what came next or whether it was the slow, accumulating resentment from all the small, unkind things. The jokes made at my expense when she needed a punchline. The way she would tuck away apologies like spare change and only take them out when it was convenient. That finally congealed into something that felt like resolve. Maybe a planning is too sharp a word. Perhaps it was more like composing a letter out of a series of small truths I'd been saving. At 2:30 in the morning, when the neighborhood was awash of sodium lamps and the city buses croaked by like tired beasts, she texted me a selfie from the bar. Hairpin messily, mascara high, smile wide. The caption, "We're missing all the fun." I typed back a short reply, "I'll be home in 30." She sent a string of laugh emojis and a photo of her drink. I put my phone face down and finished my shift. When I walked the 2 blocks to her apartment, I felt like an actor returning to a stage I no longer remembered how to perform on. Our building smelled of rain and laundry. The elevator hummed in a familiar, consoling tone, and I rehearsed nothing at all. She opened the door in the light of the hallway like sunlight stepping in through an open window, exuberant, a little flushed, carrying the story of a night she had decided was an anecdote worthy victory. She kissed me in the doorway with the same ad-libbed affection she offered in crowds, and I let the moment exist only as it was, small, bright, easily folded away. We made coffee in the quiet hours, the way people stitch themselves back together in the dark. She told me more jokes about exes and high school embarrassments, and I listened and laughed at the polite places, cataloging everything inside like a man making a map. The map had notes. Her favorite childhood dog, the way she snapped her fingers when she was excited, the tiny freckle behind her left ear, the way she called me a morning, no matter the hour. Each detail felt like evidence of intimacy, but there was the other side of that intimacy too, an awareness that she liked to be tested, that she liked to see who would stand their ground and who would scatter. It was after midnight when she fell asleep with her cheek against my shoulder, the TV murmuring some forgotten sitcom. I watched her for a long time, feeling the familiar swell of affection that comes when the person you love is finally quiet enough to see them clearly. In the blue glow of the screen, I thought about the jokes she had made, about how easily words can become manacles or gifts depending on who controls the timing, and I thought absurdly and for a moment with a cruelty my conscience flinched at, of what she had said. If my ex texted me right now, I'd leave him instantly. The sentence settled like a coin under a cushion, small, metallic, and capable of cutting fingers if they dug blindly. A memory flickered. Months earlier, when she had once watched me anxiously while a woman in our mutual friends' circle flirted with my name in my eyes, she had laughed and told me it was just a calibration, as if I were a machine whose settings needed adjusting. I had accepted that language then, calibration, testing, because it seemed easier to be amused than to be wounded. But beneath amusement had been a quiet accumulation of tiny bruises. I pulled out my phone and wrote a message, then deleted it and wrote another. For a long time, the sentences I crafted were more rehearsal than declaration, more attempt to find the precise note that would say both "I see you" and "this cannot stand." When at last I hit send, I felt the odd, hollow sensation of someone pulling a thread to see if the whole sweater will come apart. The text was from an anonymous number, crafted in a way she'd recognize, a few private details, a line about a movie reference only she would laugh at, a timestamp that matched the joke. It read bluntly and with cruel simplicity. "If he's still in your bed, you should know. I can come back tonight. But I didn't send it with the intention of wrecking her, though perhaps my motives were more complicated than the word intention allows. I sent it because I wanted to watch her confronting the truth of what she had said in the light she had cast it, a casual test to see if others would rearrange themselves for her amusement. I wanted her to feel a small vertigo, the sensation of discovering that the thin canopy of our life could be shaken by a draft. That in its own dark way felt like an education. She woke with the phone buzzing on her stomach like an insect. She saw the number, the message, and the color left her face in an instant. The joke that had been armor became suddenly transparent. She whispered, "Oh my God," and sat up, fingers trembling as she began to draft a reply and then delete it. Draft and delete. "Who is this?" A stop. "You're lying." Her friend's laughter from earlier returned like a phantom. And for a breath, a sharp, clean breath, the woman I knew quieted into a child who could not tell truth from performance. She asked me the question simultaneously, a demand and a plea. "Can you call him?" I shrugged as if the shrug were casual, but my palms were pale. "I don't know who that is," I told her, which was true in the narrow sense and a lie in the larger one. She looked at me with that particular look women use when they are measuring whether the person beside them is a partner or a stage prop. Her trust, which had been molded by her own choices and not by me, wavered. We had a fight that night that hitchhiked on all the small betrayals of months. The late text she left unread, the jokes at my expense, the nights I made plans, and she canceled with the ease of someone who believed the world revolved around her calendrical whims. In the heat of our argument, she accused me of being cruel and small. I accused her of testing love like a science experiment. Her friends would ask me on the sly whose side I was on, and I learned to answer with the soulful ambiguity of someone who prefers solitude to performance. "Neither," I would say. "I'm on my own side." Months passed. She began predictably to scar for real, small ellipses of regret, apologies that matured from shiny theater to something quieter, a humility that was raw and unfamiliar. She would leave me messages in the night, confessing things she'd said that hurt me, naming the tests she had set like crimes. She wrote long texts about how she had been raised to perform, and how the applause had been her only currency, and these confessions thudded into my lap like rain against a tin roof, easy to hear, slow to revive anything. I read them and sometimes replied, not with the satisfaction of a man who had achieved his revenge, but with the complicated mixture of compassion and reckoning of someone trying to decide whether to be a martyr or a man. There were moments when I thought perhaps the person she was becoming, though softer, more honest iteration, could be someone I could love. The love I had learned cannot be simply rethreaded over a burned seam. It requires a substrate that does not keep catching fire. The revenge, if it can be called that, finally came not from a spectacle but from a choice. I chose myself. I chose to be the person who would not forever excuse my own erasure. I stopped answering the performative calls that required me to be the perfect partner on demand. I told her, in a conversation that was matter-of-fact and devastating in its simplicity, that I needed more than promises, and that her words had to be matched by the small, steady work of being trustworthy when no one was watching. She cried, the kind of crying that is a cleansing, and it almost won me back. But there is an economy in pain and a limit to what one man can carry for another. "You knew what you were doing," she said finally, through tears and snot and apologies. "You knew how to hurt me back." I did. "Why did?" I said, and in the admission there was relief. Not because I wanted to punish her more, but because the truth had to be named. Breakups are always like funerals without a body. Sometimes you grieve a dream. Sometimes you grieve the person you tried to become for them. When we split, there was a fury on both sides that felt like the last clapping of two hands that had once fit. She posted pictures of us for a week, each photo a claim laid like a flag in public spaces. We were here. I posted nothing. I let the silence do its work. She began dating again, at first clumsily, then with her usual ferocity. The ex she had joked about never came back. If anything, the text I had sent became a ghost story she told in bars as a cautionary tale about men who played psychological games. Psychological games. People who knew both of us took sides, as all communities do, hungry for story and eager to assign roles, and I found some relief in not being the protagonist of that frenzied tale anymore. Life, once you stop performing it for an audience, becomes quieter and stranger. Years later, in a small coffee shop in a part of town neither of us had frequented together, I saw her across the room. She had the same laugh and a different coat. She sat with a man who listened to her with a kind of reverent focus that made my chest ache and then unclench in the same breath. She saw me, and there was a flicker of recognition, a momentary reloading of all the small artifacts that had belonged to our relationship. The name I had whispered in the dark, the way we had split a slice of pie at 2 in the morning. She looked away quickly, which I respected, and then she got up and crossed the room with the decisive gait that had once attracted me. Can we talk? She asked, voice small in a way it had never been when we were together. I could have stayed and reopened the old wound, let her try to stitch it differently, listen to her list of how she had changed, the classes she had taken, the therapist she had seen, the work she had done on herself as if self-improvement were a shopping list to be checked off. But my revenge, the quiet, slow thing I had cultivated inside me, had changed shape into something far less dramatic than I expected. It had become freedom. I was free enough to keep what I had learned, free enough to know that I could feel her absence and be whole. I'm glad you called, I said. And when she asked if we could be friends, I hesitated, because that is the modern liturgy of so many wounded hearts, friendship as a consolation prize. I thought of the thousands of little kindnesses that have to exist to make friendship possible after love. I thought of boundaries repeated and repaired. A maybe, I said at last. A not yet. She smiled, oddly relieved, and the smile reminded me of the woman who had once made the room rotate for her girl. We parted with a hug that was warm and brief, not the clinging embrace of a couple trying to find the lost coordinates of themselves, but a human exchange that acknowledged two people who had once been important to one another and had learned their lesson. Phew. After she left, I walked back out into the street and felt as if the city had been subtly rearranged. The air was fuller, or perhaps it was only that I had more space to breathe. Revenge rarely has the clean arc we imagine when we plot it in the heat of hurt. It is more often a series of small moral recalibrations, choosing to stop participating in one's own erasure, refusing to be a punchline for someone else's amusement, reclaiming the narrative of your life from people who would treat you like a prop. In the end, my act of vengeance, if it can be called such, was to live a life that did not revolve around her applause. I took a job teaching at night, something that patched the edges of my bank account and fed me with the humility of other people's questions. I learned to play 3 chords on the guitar and loved the way the instrument answered. I planted herbs on the windowsill and watched them grow in a way she never would have found glamorous. Sometimes in a bar or at a friend's wedding, someone would ask me about her and about that night, and I would tell the truth, that we had loved and hurt each other, that revenge had flickered in my heart and then faded into something quieter, something steadier. Something steady. People would nod as if they had expected the story to end in a melodramatic flourish, and I would find myself grateful that it had not. If there is a moral to this messy human tale, it is not tidy. Do not test hearts as if they are toys, and do not think that laughter absolves cruelty. Solves cruelty. But also do not mistake the desire for revenge for the same thing as the desire for justice. Revenge often makes a small man feel taller for a while, but justice asks for honest accounting and repair. I did not want to break her just to prove a point. I wanted to wake her up. Whether I succeeded is something she will answer in the silence of her own life. As for me, when I think back to that night, to the slender joke she made, and the anonymous text that sent it spinning into consequence, I understand that human beings are both fragile and stubborn. We tell jokes to test our place in the world. We send anonymous messages to feel control. We pay for our cruelties with lonely nights and small, stubborn acts of repair. The city keeps moving. People reconfigure themselves like furniture after a storm. She learned something, I learned something, and the people who laughed at the table that first night probably forgot the punchline by morning, because laughter is transient and the work of living is not. In the end, I smile when I think of that strange curve of events, not with the quick satisfaction of a man who staged a perfect revenge, but with the softer contentment of someone who chose himself, who turned a hurt into a lesson, and who, in the quiet aftermath, discovered that the truest triumph is a life rebuilt with honest, unperformed